Joining us now by phone is Trump's own lawyer, Jay Sekulow. Mr. Sekulow, thank you for joining us. Give us your initial reactions.
I'm very pleased, both from the outset of this entire inquiry, we have said that there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, and that determination proved to be correct. We also said there was no obstruction, and that also became correct. So we're very, very pleased. We think this is a complete victory for the president. And I also would say that the process upon which this moved this weekend it was very, very good for the American people that this amount of information so far has been released this quickly.
What about the portion of the report that says, although the president did not commit a crime, it does not exonerate him?
Well, that goes to the statements from the special counsel's report, where they said, but you have to point out the fact, as you did, that there's not evidence that he committed a crime. They didn't exonerate. The special counsel did not. They left that to the Department of Justice to determine within there, because they are part of the Department of Justice, unlike an independent counsel. And what happened was that the Department of Justice made the conclusion that there was no obstruction because there was no underlying crime, and that the actions that were taken, as they noted publicly, the report identifies no actions in our judgment that constitute obstructive conduct. And that's the conclusion of the Department of Justice. The
president never sat down with Robert Mueller in person. Can you now tell us what Robert Mueller asked Donald Trump, at least on paper?
I can't. I cannot discuss that with you at this point. That would be not appropriate for me to do. We did answer a series of questions in writing that they asked for, and the president did respond to those.
If Congress continues this and at some point tries to talk to you or talk to anybody involved in this investigation, how do you expect to handle those requests?
I'm the president's lawyer. Communications that I have are attorney-client privilege.
In terms of the report and what will be released to the public, are you expecting to request that anything is privileged in the report, or will you allow it to be made public as is?
So that's not a decision. So just to be clear there, on the issue of whether there's executive material, privileged material, that would be a decision that would be engaged in between the Department of Justice and the White House, not the president's. That would not be me, Rudy Giuliani, or the Raskins, our legal team. That would be a decision that's made by the White House in consultation with the Department of Justice. But I think everybody would agree that General Barr moved very quickly here, gets the report on a Friday at about 5 o'clock, and 48 hours later delivers what they call the principal conclusions. I thought that was impressive, and I thought it was well thought out, and obviously we're very, very pleased with the result. But with regard to what happens to the report in the future, that's really not in the jurisdiction of the president's private lawyers.
Have you requested a copy of the Mueller report in its entirety?
We have not.
Are you going to?
Nope.
Why not?
Not at this point. Because the way the regulations are written, it is a confidential report between the special counsel and the attorney general. And we don't have, under the regulations, and I think Neil wrote those regulations, we don't have the right to go in and demand access to the underlying report.
Do you believe Congress should stop investigating?
Look, yes. I think that this whole issue of, I can not count the number of times people on all of the networks said, we have significant evidence of collusion as members of Congress between the president himself and the Russians. Some called it treasonous conduct. Others called it, collusion or conspiracy with the Russians and interference by the Russians knowingly made by the president. All those statements were made. The special counsel and the Department of Justice took a very contrary view. There was no collusion. That was the basis upon which this investigation was launched, and the conclusion was unequivocal that there was none.
Can you maybe shed some light on this for us? It's a question that we've been asking a lot. Why did so many of those around Donald Trump, on the question of contacts with Russia, lie about it if there was nothing nefarious going on?
I cannot address that as the president's lawyer. It's not something that we would know or we would deal with. But the president, and they said the campaign as well in the report, that there was no evidence of collusion, period, and unequivocal.
Have you spoken to the president?
If I did, I wouldn't tell you.
Why not?
I wouldn't. But I don't want to get into conversations I had with the president or have not had with the president. But needless to say, we're very pleased.
What about the president himself? And because I'm sure you've talked to him about this. I have not asked him this other than in the moment.
The White House just sent out a statement.
I asked him about this in the moment, but maybe you can shed some more light on this. Why would he get on a stage and ask Russia to find Hillary Clinton's emails?
I'm not going to what we call relitigate facts or circumstances. You know what? All of these facts and circumstances that were out there were obviously evaluated by the special counsel, and they concluded there was no collusion.
The president has tweeted, no collusion, no obstruction, complete and total exoneration. Keep America great. Were you giving him advice over the weekend to keep quiet until this came out?
Now, if I was your lawyer, would you want me telling you the advice I did give or did not give to you? You would not ask me to do that. I'm not going to do that.
What about in determining obstruction? I have a number of legal minds on this panel right now who are questioning how quickly Bill Barr was able to determine that there was no obstruction. We know that Robert Mueller presented both sides of the issue, evidence to say that he did obstruct, evidence to say that he did not obstruct. A lot of that was in the public sphere already. We've been reporting on it, the Comey firing, the tweets, et cetera, the behavior presumably to Jeff Sessions among those. That's what we're presuming. What do you say to those who say that ask how quickly can William Barr really get to the bottom of that?
Well, first of all, the Deputy Attorney General of the United States was involved in this from the outset. And as you saw in the letter, he was not only consulted, but they specifically referenced that both the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, and I have concluded, I'm reading from the letter, that the evidence developed during the special counsel investigation is not sufficient to establish that the president committed an obstruction of justice offense. And they also importantly said here that our determination was made without regard to and is not based on the constitutional considerations that surround the indictment and criminal prosecution of a sitting president. That's important because it was not a declination because you can't indict a sitting president. They made a factual determination based on the evidence that there was not evidence of obstruction.
Why did the president not sit back and allow this investigation to happen? Why was he so involved? The
investigation did happen. It's been going on for almost 2 years. Bob Mueller was not fired with all the attacks on that issue and that were made. Bob Mueller was not fired. No FBI agent that was involved in the case was interfered with. The fact of the matter is there was no collusion. There was no obstruction determination here. This is a vindication of the legal positions, but also the factual positions that we've been advocating since the outset.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.